King, Comforter, Spirit of Truth, art everywhere present and fill us all things, treasury of good things and giver of life, come and dwell within us and cleanse us of all impurity and save our souls, O good one. Holy God, holy mighty, holy immortal, have mercy on us. Glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, both now and ever and unto the ages of ages. Amen. Welcome back to Reason and Theology, everyone. Your host, Michael. We're talking about Pope Pius XII, Fatima, and the destruction of the liturgy, joined by Kevin Symons and also Dom from the Logos Project. Gentlemen, welcome to the show, and how are y'all?
Doing well. Yourself?
Doing great.
Doing
Thanks,
really
Michael.
good. Yeah, good to have y'all on. So let's dive in here. This is because I have seen some claims circulated for quite a while now, and they're continuing to circulate. And they relate to Pope Pius XII, Fatima, the destruction of the liturgy. I remember first coming across this in the work of Christopher Ferrara in his book on Fatima. But I've definitely seen it in many other places. Kevin, I'd like to start with you. Let me get your thoughts here. Can you maybe set us up and tell us a little bit about what is it that Pope Pius XII allegedly says?
Sure. Well, the Pius XII is reputed to have made a very now famous quote within the traditionalist world with respect to how he has been like obsessed or very mentally preoccupied with what he calls the confidences of the of Our Lady to Sister Lucia of Fatima, or like the secrets, if you will. That's another way some people translate the word in question. More on that a little bit later. And then he says how that this preoccupation of Our Lady of warning against these kinds of things is a warning against changing the liturgy. Actually says suicide in the liturgy of changing it. And let me just pull it up here specifically so I have the text in front of me. Yeah, it's against that represents the suicide to alter the faith, her theology, her liturgy, and her soul is the other half of it. And people have used this quote in the Third Secret of Fatima discussions in order to demonstrate that there is something more, the so-called fourth secret, if you will. And this quote has come up again in recent years, again, to reiterate the point. But I know when I first came across the quote, it was from Father Paul Kramer's book, The Devil's Final Battle. I am drawing a blank, to be honest with you, as to the precise page. If somebody else is talking, I can go through the book real quick and find the page.
Right. It's okay.
But I know that this is where I was reading it. And then I was like, in 2007, that was a big year for Fatima studies, because that was when the battles between John the 23rd secretary, Loris Capovilla, was taking place with like Solideo Paolini and the Fourth Secret stuff. That was a big year for Cardinal Bertone. That was a big year for those things. So when I was reading the book, I said, okay, what is this quote from Pius XII and what's going on here? So in 2007, I actually bought the book in question where the quote comes from, Piedus devant l'histoire. I think I've mentioned it on the show before, by Monsignore Georges Roche of Philippe Saint-Germain, but also Robert Lafont, I guess, is also somehow involved with this. So this is the book. We get the text in question, and I think we're going to have some interesting little revelations and or discussions on it. So that's the general background to it.
Yeah. Anything to add to that, Dom, before we move forward?
Not really. I'm here because I speak French and I can translate. And so, yeah, that's about it.
And that will certainly come in handy here in just a little bit. So I appreciate you coming on and doing this.
Anytime.
Yeah. So Kevin, maybe tell us a little bit about maybe some of the people who have claimed that this is used to back up the Third Secret of Fatima. I think that you have come across this with certain people who are associated or are part of the radical traditionalist crowd? I mean, tell us a little bit about that.
Yes. As I mentioned a minute ago, one of the first times that you see this brought up is in the book The Devil's Final Battle by Father Paul Kramer. And I'm just quickly looking through the footnotes trying to find where because I'm going by pure memory on this one. But it's used because the quote itself from attributed to Pius XII is very, very powerful. And it's seen as a divine, like a mystical, supernatural warning about Vatican II in a way, with all the liturgical changes. And Dom can correct me on anything however I translate this, but on page 52, the quote begins towards the bottom, and the quote is this: "I am obsessed by the confidences or the secrets of the Virgin to little Lucia Fatima." This literally the word is obstination, but this or steadfastness of the good lady facing the dangers that menaces the church. It is a divine warning against the suicide that represents the alteration of the faith in her liturgy, her theology, and her soul.
Yep,
And then it
that's
goes
right.
on to say how Pius then had kind of stopped for a moment, like a s'arrêtera un moment, You know, it kind of stops for a second. Then it continues to say about how there are innovators, new things that they want to dismantle the sacred chapel, destroy the universal flame of the church, reject her ornaments, and make remorse or give remorse or create remorse, if you will.
Make her feel bad about her past. Yeah.
Yeah, make her feel bad about her historical past. And that, and yes, my dear friend, I have the conviction that the Church of Peter is that assume son passé ou alors creusera sa tombe.
The Church of Peter must assume her past, or else it will dig itself into a hole
There
or a
you go.
grave. Yeah.
Yes, and that he's in a great battle, an interior battle There's a great battle going on within the interior of the church, as there is on the exterior, wherein the forces of evil want one day. What would be how would you say severe?
Here I would say, if even though the forces of evil might one day basically make use of my person, of my acts, of my writings, and also try to one day disfigure the history of the church. All these human heresies that alter the word of God, so that may appear a great light. And then the quote stops and it continues. At that moment, Galeazzi noticed the look on the Pope's face that was veiled by his glasses, and it became supernatural. And let's see, it's a mystical, irresistible mystical force irradiated from his body, is what it says, of his fragile body. So that's the quote.
All right, so that's the content itself. Kevin, you were going to say something there.
Yeah, and so like we see there things like how so we get the setup is it's suicide according to this quote to try to change the faith, alter the liturgy, terrible thing. You may have the church create this kind of remorse of the church's historical past. Well, you remember this was coming to light, especially right after all of the apologies of John Paul II for various bad things that have taken place in church's history. So that's all the kind of stuff floating in the background as to why when this quote comes out, everybody was going, "Oh my goodness, what was said was true," et cetera, et cetera. But yet when you look at this text a little more closely, it's not that simple. There are some questions that come up, questions that are if I may go Gandalf, there are questions. questions that need answering.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Well-
will pull. I will pull Lord of the Rings anytime in quotes. I will even speak Elvish if I have
Well,
to.
I love Lord of the Rings. I didn't know you could speak Elvish, by the way. Yeah, I did not know anybody actually spoke Elvish. That's interesting. I
Ta-da!
wonder, do you know Klingon as well? I'm curious.
No.
Okay. All right. All right.
That's the
So
next one.
okay. All right.
But no, so in more recent years, this has come up. So, for instance, there was a video, somewhat notable video between when Taylor Marshall and Tim Gordon were doing their bromance back in the day.
Mhm.
They had a video talking about this in September of 2018,
Okay.
and Tim Gordon was trying to interpret this information along the lines of the third part of The Secret. So I actually have it queued up here if people can hear it. If
When was this? I don't think I saw the show before.
this was September the 12th, I think, of 2008. Yeah, September 12th, 2018.
I don't think I saw it.
It was Marshall's video number 156, Third Secret of Fatima and Corruption in the Catholic Church. I have it queued up if it's possible to play
Yeah,
it.
let's see it. I mean, I don't think I've seen it, but maybe some of the audience would be familiar. But perhaps for those who haven't seen it, let's watch it.
Okay. Okay, I got it. I think I did my end here. Is it showing up there, or do you have to?
Yes.
There you go. Not the most flattering picture of Tim there in the freeze frame. So, okay. So just by way of quick context, they were discussing John Paul II, the timeline of when the third part of The Secret was opened up and read, et cetera, et cetera. So that's just some of the quick context. Now they're going to move into Pius XII and what he has supposedly said on the subject.
Looks like it disappeared.
Earlier in his life.
Yeah, I can hear it in your background,
Yeah.
but it disappeared. It's not on the screen anymore.
Oh no, hold on. Technology.
And I think you'll have to mute your microphone whenever you play it. Unless you have headphones. If you put headphones in, you won't have to mute it. Yeah, we can't hear it now. You'll have to enable audio when you go to share screen.
How do I enable the audio?
So go back to share screen and you'll see a share audio feature.
Share screen.
Yeah, when you go to share screen, you'll see share system audio at the bottom left whenever you go to click your screen.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
And then you'll have to mute your mic whenever you go to play it.
This is all Pius XII related. He sent over this emissary named Father Schweigel. Earlier in his life, he had said, we don't, this remains a mystery. In the early 30s, before he was Pius XII, he said, there's this famous quote. He says, and I quote, "I'm worried by the Blessed Virgin's message to Lucy of Fatima. This persistence of Mary," which does not appear in any of the published part of it, by the way. "This persistence of Mary about the dangers which menace the church is a divine warning against the suicide of altering the faith in her liturgy, her theology, and her soul. I hear all around me," says young Pius XII, "innovators who wish to dismantle the sacred chapel," which happened, "destroy the universal flame of the church," which happened, "reject her ornaments and make her feel remorse for her historical past. A day will come when the civilized world will deny its God, when the church will doubt, as Peter doubted. She'll be tempted to believe that man has become God." I mean, stop me when any of this sounds new, given 2018's events. "In our churches, Christians will search in vain for the red lamp where God awaits them, like Mary Magdalene weeping before the empty tomb. They will ask, where have they taken him?" So Pius XII always had this preternatural connection to the third secret. I don't know where he wouldn't have read it before he was Pope. So I don't know where he got, I don't know what words he was reading when he said this back in the middle 1930s. But definitely by 1952, when he sends his emissary, Father Schweigel, and he confirms there are these two parts and there are two letters, the third secret is sent.
Okay. Looks like it stopped.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I stopped because that's roughly where it goes.
Okay.
I do apologize. If it wasn't in the Devil's Final Battle book where I originally saw this quote, it would have been somewhere else. But it's been in the traditionalist literature in the Gruner line for some time now. Okay, but so you guys have heard how Tim Gordon put it here in his bromance days with Taylor Marshall. And there are some things that are here. First, he says that this quote is from Pius XII, aka Pacelli. Well, there's actually some question of that. When you look at the book in question, this is from chapter 6, by the way. The context is actually not Pius XII, but rather Pius XI. When I started getting suspicious of this after I purchased my copy of the book in 2007, this very copy, and I still have the original receipt too. The person who owned the book before me actually, throughout this chapter, made corrections. Some places where it says Pius XII, they penciled out the extra I Roman numeral to make it 11 and not 12. So, and in this case, on page 52, the prior owner of this copy of the book had done that here. And they said Pius XI is the one who said these words, allegedly, about being, concerned about the confidences of Our Lady to Lucia of Fatima and all those other things. And so I was like, well, at that time, especially, my French wasn't as good as it is now, I guess you could say. And I didn't really get into it as much because I was like, okay, I have to put this on the back burner. So that was one of the main reasons why I thought it would be a good idea to have Dom in on this discussion, because he knows French infinitely better than I ever will. And so I said, could you help me out with just understand this? Is this in fact Pius XI or Pius XII? And I don't pretend that we're going to answer that question here. I don't think we're going to resolve that question. But I want to throw that out there to say that this is likely not even Pius XII, aka Pacelli, talking, but possibly Pius XI. Now, so Dom, if you have anything to throw in on there before I go on to the next point.
Did Pius XI wear glasses, by the way? Because I think it mentioned glasses in that text.
It definitely mentions glasses, yes. That's a good question.
Pius XI did wear glasses, yes.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
I can actually pull up a photo of him if you'd like.
No, that's okay.
It's hard to tell, but the context does suddenly shift. It shifts from talking about Pius XI several times, and then suddenly Pius XII is speaking, and then the owner of the book crossed out the Roman numeral. So I don't know. It's hard to tell because it does seem to involve both of these popes in all the screenshots you sent me. But I don't know. So the context seems to point to Pius XI.
All right.
Yeah.
Sharing screen here. Yeah.
Yeah, that's Pius XI.
Mm-hmm.
And Pius XII, who I'll bring up here, he also too wore glasses, as we see here in this.
Well, there we go.
Okay. So it's one of those two. Could be either. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about both of them then. Let's ask the question: could either of them have had access to the third secret of Fatima at this time?
No, it is absolutely impossible, and this is what's creating a problem. But before to answer that question, let me back it up to about 2017. Okay. Back in 2017, I remember there was an article on 1 Peter 5. Mike, do you know which one I'm talking about?
I can probably bring it up here. Let's see. So I would imagine 1 Peter 5, Pope Pius XII, Liturgy, Fatima should come up then, right?
Probably, yeah. I forget the gentleman who published it, the name of the gentleman, but
so it's called Pius XII's Prophetic Warnings about Fatima and the Suicide of Altering the Faith in its Liturgy by Andrew Guernsey, I guess, Guernsey. Looks like it was June 12th.
I think.
Yeah, June 12th, 2017. Which this is one of the articles that I saw circulating today, actually. So, yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, I remember reading that article, and they talked about this in the context of the third part of the secret, and I'm drawing a blank now as to what was specifically in that article, but when it came up at the time, that was 2017. It was the 100th anniversary of the centenary year of Fatima, so a lot of traditionalist websites, including 1P5, were just going off on the subject, talking about it. I'd prefer going off the rails, but that's my humble opinion on the matter, because I myself talked to the then editor and owner of 1P5, Steve Skojek, about things, and he didn't listen. He didn't heed my warning, and it led to some very bad stuff. But this quote came up, and I was trying to point out to people and go, well, you guys got to kind of take a step back here. This is not proof for the so-called fourth secret. But here's why people are doing this, because if it talks about the confidences of the Virgin to little Lucia Fatima, this quote is attributed to Pacelli in the early 1930s, as you heard in the video by Tim Gordon, right? I've heard as late of a date as 1932, 1933, roughly. The secret of Fatima, we knew, at that time in the early 30s, we knew that there was a secret. What we didn't know at the time was that it was in 3 parts. That division of one secret, 3 parts was revealed by Sister Lucia in her 3rd memoir, which she wrote in 1941. So look at the dates: 32, 33, 1941. If Pius XI or Pius XII had said this in the early 30s, what were they basing these remarks on? The only thing that we had up to that point in time were things like the interviews and the testimonies, of which, the Shrine of Fatima has been publishing those early documents in the Critical Documentation of Fatima series. This is the selection of documents volume where it has all of the main ones in there. And I'm happy to state that due to the efforts of various people, including the Shrine of Fatima and the University of Dayton, we now have this Portuguese book with all the texts available in English translation. So anybody who wants to read the documents, you have them now in English right here. And they go through who said what and why, and when you go through the documentation, the available documentation, there's no real gory details regarding the secret of Fatima itself. Lucia did say in 1917 that it is good for some, bad for others. But how could you extrapolate, suicide of the liturgy and altering the faith? How do you extrapolate that from such paucity of remarks? Very little was said on the secret itself by Lucia, Jacinta, and Francisco. Up to the 30s. Of course, Jacinta and Francisco were dead by the end of February 1920. So what's going on here? What are they basing these remarks on? So what I'm trying to do is, not only is there a question about who said this, Pius XI, Pius XII, but also how could they have made these kinds of strong remarks in the early 30s when the documentation that might have supported that didn't exist?
And Kevin, to add to that, just to be clear, the passage says this insistence of the good lady, as well as it says here below, this is a divine warning against, and then it lists that, suicide of liturgy, blah blah blah. Like, that's pretty explicit. That's not just Sister Lucy said that we ought to, beware of some future impending problem. Here it's very specific on what that is, and it's even it sounds like they know exactly what Our Lady said because of the wording here, which wouldn't have been the case. So
exactly. I mean, Fatima had only just been approved on October the 13th, 1930, officially by the Bishop of Leiria, Dom José Correa da Silva. And the question becomes, what was known by ecclesiastical authorities? Did they know more than what they let on? Or are we going to start create? But in which case, then, how can you prove things? We do know, because there's some indication of it, that the Bishop of Leiria knew about the angel of Portugal before Sister Lucia wrote about it, and I think it was the second memoir, I think, is when she started writing about it. So we knew already that he was kind of already aware of that. But there's nothing in the historical record that talks about anything to do with the secret proper. And even when you look back at the apparitions of the angel of Portugal, he's talking to them about making reparation and praying for sinners. How do you extrapolate suicide, altering the faith, the liturgy, theology, the church, the soul of the church? How do you extrapolate that even from just what the guardian angel says? Now, so one could take the Deus ex machina approach and go, well, it's what Tim Gordon said, Kevin. It's the, he had a prophetic instinct, Pius XII did. And so, he knew this, that, and the other thing. Well, again, I would refer you, is it Pius XII who even said this? I do believe that Pius XII had a very developed prophetic instinct. I do personally hold to that based upon what I have read and, what I've seen and stuff. But that doesn't account for having this kind of in-depth thinking on what was then in the 1930s, very, very little information about the specifics of what was said or shown via vision on Fatima. Something is not adding up here.
So it seems like it would be an appeal to, prophetic inspiration over and against what the church has actually told us the Fatima message is after its release.
I wouldn't even say, I don't know if I'd say that as much as I would say it'd be prophetic instinct over and against the historical record in general.
Okay.
So that would be almost a pure Deus ex machina approach.
Mm-hmm. Now, what if this was
How do you prove that?
So what if this was Pius XI? Were there people around him who could have given him insight into the message of the third secret?
Oh, yes, there would have been. But Pius XI's aversion to private revelations is very well known. His own personal secretary later became a cardinal. I'm trying to remember how to say his name correctly, but it's Confalonieri was the secretary to Pius XI, and he wrote a biography that was published by the Benzinger Sisters, not the Benzinger brothers that most people would know about, but the Benzinger Sisters. They had their own publishing house. And first it was published in Italian, and then the sisters issued it in English translation. And you can find it online, I'm sure. I myself have a copy of it in my library. And I double checked the Italian when I was researching for my book on Fatima, and the English translation was fairly faithful to what the Italian said. But there's a story that Confalonieri relates, wherein Pius had actually gotten some alleged private revelation, and the cardinal writes, he just took it and just threw it into the trash can, and then said, "Well, if Our Lady is speaking, she's not talking to me." And that was the end of that. So if the Pope had that kind of an attitude toward alleged private revelations, and by the way, we don't know what revelation he was looking at. We don't know. That wasn't specified by the cardinal. Some have speculated that it's Fatima, but there's no proof of that. Either which way, if that's the kind of attitude or disposition that Pius XI had in such matters, does that jive with what we're reading here on page 52, that he is obsessed? with what the Virgin told Lucia? Something's not adding up here. There's so much that's just questionable about this. And that article on 1 Peter 5 brought out some criticisms that were written by a former priest of the book. I forget. You still have the article pulled up, Mike?
Let me pull it back up.
Okay.
Okay, so got it pulled up now. Where am I going?
Okay. Where it talks about the criticisms by the so-called modernist priest.
All right, you want me to share screen?
Yeah, that way everybody can read it and see how they characterized it over on 1P5.
This is what came up in my keyword search. Am I in the right section?
Yeah, here it is. That's here. Yeah. So it's the author wrote, it should be noted that Pius devant l'Histoire was given a scathing review by liberal laicized ex-priest Émile Poulat at the time of its publication in Archives of the Social Sciences of Religion, literally 1972, et cetera, et cetera. First, let me commend the author of this article for giving us a good citation with a link. I think that's a link. I want to thank him for that. Not everybody does that, so kudos to you. Poulat called the work as a whole, quote, improbable, bearing little resemblance to the truth, end quote. He criticized the authors for poor citations, bibliographies, and various errors, quote, all from the same fanciful ink, end quote. Now let me pause there for a minute. There's the characterization as improbable, bearing little resemblance to the truth. If this quote that we've been looking at is true, then just by looking at the questions that we're talking about or that we're looking at here, then you got to wonder if the criticism of this book as improbable, bearing little resemblance to the truth, actually might hold water after all. But here's where the author of this article on 1P5 starts kind of going off the rails by first of all, he kind of sets you up by saying, liberal laicized ex-priest. Well, first of all, if you're a laicized, you are a quote unquote ex-priest. So why are we reiterating this? There's a certain emphasis being added here. So in other words, we don't like you, rah, he's got an axe to grind against the church, blah, blah, blah. So instead of taking him on for his arguments, this is an ad hominem. Oh, he's just a modernist, laicized ex-priest, kind of redundant, as I said, but why should we take him seriously? This book tells us the truth. Pius XII predicted it, and it's exactly what happened with Vatican II. Did he? That's what we're looking at. Did he? Or is the gentleman who wrote the criticism of this book, did he in fact tell the truth? It's not clear. We have to look at the arguments themselves, not just simply dismiss somebody because they're a former priest and are a modernist and a liberal. I don't know this Poulat writer. I don't know who he is. I haven't studied him, but I do know that I did look up around the time of that article's publication because I said, "Oh, well, here's something I've been interested in." I looked it up at some point, and I don't remember now what my findings were, but the general principle I think still stands. We should take a look at somebody's arguments, not just dismiss them based upon ad hominem. And if he sits there and says there are improbabilities in this book, I can't help but wonder if this quote attributed to, again, Pius XI or Pius XII, I can't help but wonder if this is one of them. If it was in the 1930s, it is improbable. This is the very definition of improbable. If this was by 1933, yeah, that's the definition of improbable. So you got to wonder.
So I guess my question then would be, what does this say about people who are attributing this to Pius XII rather than being aware that there's some question there? What does that say about their research methods?
Well, for one thing, it is a type. If it is true, we talked earlier with the crossing out, it was a typo. It's built right into the book where it says Pius XII stops for a moment. Yeah, Sareta, right, Dom, is like Dom's not with us anymore. Okay.
Mhm.
That Pius XII stopped a moment before
Mhm.
continuing. So they're seeing Pius XII in the same paragraph.
Mhm.
And so it's okay. I mean, if it is a typo in the book, not everybody speaks French. And when this information got brought into the English, the Anglophone world, English speaking world, one could understandably
Mhm.
see how that connection could have been made.
Mhm.
If it was a typo in the book, if it was a typo, then we could say it was a typo in the book. So that's a little more understandable. I get that,
Yep.
especially if French is not your first language.
Sure.
I would still encourage people, however, to look at context, and to do that, you'd have to go back into the rest of the chapter that does talk about Pacelli and other stuff with like Leo the 13th, but also Pius XI and what was going on between him and Mussolini, etc. Just to get a more of a fullness of what was being said, so that when you reach that point in the text, you kind of go, oh wait, okay, now I have a better picture of what's going on. I wish something like that had been able to have gotten out a little bit more prominently than just this one little selection between pages 52 and 53.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I'm more merciful. I'm more understanding because of of the possibility of a typo here.
Mhm.
But we what's that old saying? I think Ronald Reagan said it: trust but verify.
Yeah.
And even still, we're just presenting things for people's consideration. We're not trying to issue any definitive conclusion on the matter. People can fact check what we're saying here, and that's fine. And if someone could show that it is Pius XII, I'd like to know that, because why is
Let
this being crossed out as Pius XI?
And let's say it is Pius XII. Would you still say, however, that this interpretation here and this account is still speculative?
Yeah, in a way, it doesn't really matter if it was Pius XI, Pius XII, because you're still looking at the historical data and you're saying, how do you extrapolate that kind of a sentence, or those kinds of points on the message of Our Lady from what was known in the 30s?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But it
So
seems like
when were these alleged words said?
Mm-hmm.
And in the timeline, well, you heard Tim Gordon said it was in the early 30s. Others have said it was in the early 30s. So if that's it, then what's going on here? Or is this quote taken out from someplace later in the Pope's life and put back earlier? I mean, there's all kinds of questions here, and no one's done the work to really bring this up. But people are more than happy to sit there and use the quote itself to go after the liturgical changes in Vatican II and various acts of the pontiff since then.
Well, aren't there others that would corroborate this interpretation of Pius XII? I vaguely recall something about an interview with Ratzinger. I don't know if it was in '84 or something like that, but it was a while back. And I think he said something along the lines of Fatima touching on issues related to the liturgy. I might be misremembering. Could you comment on that specifically?
I can actually. I covered this directly in chapter 13, I think, of my book.
Okay.
Yeah, chapter 6, subsection 6, Fatima Ratzinger and the Novissimi.
Mm-hmm.
In 1984, Joseph Cardinal Ratzinger gave an interview with the Italian journalist Vittorio Messori.
Mm-hmm.
The interview was published in the magazine Jesus, or Jesu in Italian, in its November 11th, 1984 issue.
Mm-hmm.
It was later published by Ignatius Press as the Ratzinger Report, an exclusive interview on the state of the church. During the course of the interview, the subject of Fatima was raised, and Messori inquired about the third part of the secret. And between the Italian version that was published in Jesu and then the English text that appeared in the Ratzinger Report, there was a noted discrepancy, and it appeared to be an editing of Ratzinger's remarks on Fatima in the third part of the secret.
Mm-hmm.
And this discrepancy was noted and commented upon by Father Nicholas Gruner and his organization.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at the Italian, when they're talking about the third part of the secret, because that's the context of it, is that basically what he's saying is that the third part of the secret doesn't tell us anything else than what is contained in divine or public revelation. The radical call for conversion, absolute seriousness of history, the dangers threatening the faith and the life of the Christian, therefore of the world. Then the importance of the novissimi. Now, this is kind of the crux, because that does sound a little familiar. Dangers threatening the faith, right?
Right.
Well, how do you get that out of a vision of the Pope, bishops, cardinals, and priests and religious and lay people walking up towards a cross through a half-ruined city being shot at?
Right. Right.
What? Well, I treat that question at length in my book, and then or some length, I should say, and then I think a little bit in our webinars last year. But the dangers threatening the faith is not some necessarily apocalyptic kind of thing. And when we talk about the novissimi, that word in the theological tradition can refer back to the end times, like Antichrist, the second coming, but it could also refer to the four last things of death, judgment, heaven, and hell. Well, when that quote was brought up in Frère Michel's book on Fatima, Tu la vérité sur Fatima, somebody translated the Italian novissimi, which is also Latin, as le dernier temps, the last times. So they lopped off the whole meaning of the other meaning of that word novissimi, and they made it exclusively about the last times. So that makes it sound big and apocalyptic, like Book of Revelation stuff. But that's not necessarily what Ratzinger said. When you go back and you look at it through the lens of the theological tradition, and you restore that meaning of the four last things. And little known fact about Ratzinger, but he actually has an interest in eschatology. He wrote a book about it with Johann Auer that's published by, I think, Ignatius Press. And I know because it was used by Dr. Regis Martin in our eschatology class at Franciscan University like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
You have it, yeah. So he has an interest in eschatology. And when you look at it through the theological lens and his interests, Ratzinger's that is, it becomes much more understanding what he meant. So if we're talking about the four last things of death, judgment, heaven, and hell, if there are dangers that are threatening the life of the Christian, and therefore of the world, well, if you read it through that lens, well, errors, Our Lady said at Fatima, would spread from Russia throughout the world, causing all of those terrible things that she said, right? Wars and persecutions, the good will be martyred, the Holy Father will have much to suffer, various nations will be annihilated, another and worse war will break out during the pontificate of Pius XI, right? All these terrible things. Well, then then we have our answer here. The dangers threatening the life of the Christian can be understood in that sense of errors destroying the supernatural life of grace in the soul. And if you have thus made, to use Pauline terms, a shipwreck of your faith, is that faith going to save you at your judgment? Or have you abandoned the faith? Have you committed apostasy? Have you engaged in heresy? Have you led others against Christ? You will answer for this at your judgment. So Ratzinger's words here take on a much more profound meaning when you look at it from that kind of a perspective, not the exclusive eschatological end times kind of thing that got filtered through the mistranslation into from the Italian to the French, and then the French into the English when John Colarafi translated it in that way in the 1980s. And I name him publicly because it's already public knowledge anyway that John Colarafi translated it. And he frequents R&T's chat, so people can ask him, People don't know that, but he comes to the RT chat, and I've talked with him about this, and he admitted, yeah, it's true. There was that wasn't a correct translation from the Italian to the French, if I remember, because I've emailed him. This is what it kind of all comes down to, is we have to understand what these words mean and how they were intended to be received. And in this case of Fatima, Ratzinger, and the Novissimi, you have to look at it from the larger theological tradition and not through that mistranslation that was put into French and then came into English when Frère Michel's book was translated. So it might be a bit of a long-winded way to answer your question, but
I'm noticing a consistent theme. Correct me if I'm wrong in my impression, but I'm noticing a consistent theme. It seems like there's a lot of things that people are kind of pushing this perspective of Fatima. There's a lot of things that they appeal to that on the surface seem to make sense of the current crisis in the church. But then when you dig a little bit deeper, it's not as clear cut as they made it seem. Is that an accurate impression?
I think so. Yeah. Because a lot of people have done knee-jerk reactions. They've got an idea, and they'll look for things that will back up that idea, but they don't do a lot of the digging, and details get lost.
Mm-hmm.
And when with my research on Fatima, that has been a very consistent theme. They've latched on, as what Dr. Joaquin Navarro-Valls once wrote, onto one aspect of the message of Fatima, which is the anti-communist part, to the neglect of others. Now, they've latched on not without some justification, because it is true, John the 23rd had a lot of goodwill in his heart and wanted to work with people, including communists. And in doing so, he essentially reversed papal policy under Pius XI and XII, not to work with communists because of how pernicious they are and how they will co-opt you and subvert you to work for communistic ends without you even knowing about it. Pius XI even wrote about this in his encyclical Divini Redemptoris. He says that they were I'm paraphrasing, they were worming their way into church organizations in order to basically infiltrate, So this is why I don't agree in principle with, for instance, Taylor Marshall's, the thesis that is in Taylor Marshall's book. First of all, it's not his own thesis. He took that from a lot of other people who've been saying the same thing over many decades now. But it is true, in principle, the church was infiltrated. It's right there in Pius XI. It's encyclical, So we have this from the very chair of St. Peter itself, that this happened. But the question is, how do you discuss it? And that's where a lot of conversations can be held. And I'll just leave it there.
I wonder if the hermeneutic of suspicion is also operative here.
Oh, there's no question about it. Absolutely no question about it. There are some people that did get suspicious, but again, a lot of it can be rooted in that reversal of papal policy by John the 23rd.
Mm-hmm.
I call it a reversal of papal policy because, if you want, communist observers at Vatican II, I don't know what else I can say.
Right.
But he had it was good intentions, but I think it was very irenic. I forget how to pronounce it. It was very myopic. He didn't really factor in original sin, which was something that Benedict XVI talked about in the 50th anniversary of the address under the moon back in 2012. I think the 50th anniversary of John the 23rd's opening thing there with. They called it the address under the moon in 1962, and Ratzinger pointed it out. He said we're more sober now. We have more of an awareness of original sin now than we did 50 years ago. And I remember doing a dance in my living room, going, "Hallelujah! Somebody said it." I was so glad when Benedict said that, because I was like, "Oh, thank goodness." And so, again, it's in this question that you've posed. It's really a both and. Navarro Valls really put it well when he said they latched on to one aspect of the message.
Mhm.
That's true. But when you've become fixated upon that to the exclusion of all else or many other things, that's when you start to lose the plot. And in this case, with the Pieds devant l'Histoire book, it really does speak to the soul. These words speak to the very soul of what a lot of the so-called traditionalists have been saying all of these years, and that's one of the reasons why it's such a very powerful and prominent quote that comes up every so often, because it does speak direct to the soul of this. But when you do the digging into the quote itself, there are some notable questions that are unanswered at this time. And I'm open to the answers. If somebody can prove that it is from Pius XII, great. Then my next question would be, how do you reconcile the question of the years? If somebody can show, well, actually, Kevin, he said that in the 1940s after the publication of The Secret, the first two parts of this, I would sit there and I go, okay, how does that work? Show me how that happened. Like what happened in this book? That all of this misleading stuff happened. Could you straighten this out for me? And I would be very grateful to the person that could do that.
Mhm.
But that work hasn't been done yet.
Mhm.
I don't know if it ever will. So until such a time happens, I would have to tell people, please be very cautious with this quote, or do that very research that I just said and show us why it is legit. That's what I would say to people, and I say this with all due charity, of course. Even earlier when I said the bromance between, Marshall and Gordon, that's not necessarily, I didn't necessarily mean it as like a bad thing, and I apologize if anybody read that in a bad light. It's just, no, they just had a thing going on, and the word bromance isn't.
I mean, I think they had a really good connection as far as interacting with each other. I certainly question some of the content of it, but I think they had a good dynamic. I mean, that's the way I'd put it, the dynamic that they had.
Yeah, and that's generally how I understood the term bromance, because it's
not in an insulting
two
way.
guys. Yeah, I didn't mean it in a snide way. It's just more or less just people. Just two guys that got along really, really well, and they had good times and did good things together. I meant it in a general, non-snarky sense.
Sure. Yeah.
But I don't know if we have time. But do we have time to be look at any questions from the chat or anything? Or
y'all go ahead and put some in there. We'll take some for just a few minutes here, maybe about 8 minutes. Put them to @Reason and Theology. I'm trying to see if there's anything in there. I've been seeing a lot of comments, but what kind of satisfaction does one gain from distorting information and endangering the faith of the laity? Do you think that that's an accurate description of what's going on here?
I don't think. Well, this question presumes that there's actual malice.
Right.
I don't think that there is actual malice. On the part of anybody. Although I will admit there are some very serious questions about that with respect to at least one or two figures. I will not say anything further than that, so please don't ask me. But all I will say is there's a lot of background that is not public knowledge. Someday that story will be told, but it is not for now. There are little bits and pieces out there, people who have verbal tradition, as it were, or oral history that they were there for or knew the people, and someday when these events are being written down and communicated in print, those stories may be told. But especially so long as certain persons live, I don't think that kind of stuff will be out there. And it does color what we're talking about. But even looking at that panoply of knowledge, I don't think I could still say that there's actual malice involved. No. So that's what I would say to that particular question.
Fair enough. I still waiting in the chat there for some questions. I see a lot of y'all are watching and commenting, but no questions yet, so we might not have any. Did you spot any there in the chat?
Yeah. Nicholas Catostrode,
Okay.
Declan Sutherland.
How often do you think there's a genuine question of faith for Catholics, and how often are these merely conspiracies generated by anti-Catholic trolls and popularized that want to see scandal?
I think this all entirely has to do with people being in fear for the faith. I will again quote from Charles Murr's book, The Godmother, because I love that book. I think that book has gems of wisdom and nuggets in there that all of us should be reading. But in that book, between pages 119 through 120, Murr talks about an incident involving the false apparitions in Bayside, New York. Knowledge of Bayside had gone across the pond to Europe, and there was an Austrian couple, I forget their name, that had shown this information to Murr. And Sister or Mother Pascalina had also heard about this, and her and Murr were talking about it. And here's what Father Murr remembers her saying to him on this matter. Quote, "These poor people, and they are not alone, they're trying to deal with a real inner conflict. They are struggling to comprehend the incomprehensible. They are desperate to know what has happened to that once solid, unchanging, infallible church of theirs. The true faith inherited from their ancestors, learned at their mother's knees, loved and held near and dear unto death. Nothing is making sense to them any longer. Don't you see? They would be willing to accept the most bizarre hypothesis in the world, the Pope being held captive and replaced by an actor, because that was one of the things that Bayside alleged to have been with Pope Paul VI. Return to Mother Pascalina. As insane as that sounds, they somehow could find that easier to believe than what they actually see happening with the church they so dearly love. And what has been happening is far from over. The devil isn't finished yet. No, not yet. The apostasy is only beginning." Now, when she's talking about what's going on in people's minds and hearts, she's pointing out, because I do believe she said those words, but she's pointing out love and fear, I would say. They love the faith and they fear for the faith. They fear that the faith is being destroyed, denigrated, all these terrible things are taking place, and who's going to defend the faith, you know? So there's a certain psychology in place here that I think that Mother Pascalina really, very insightfully put her finger right on the button on and just nailed it. And so it's not so much that people are trying to, wackadoodle theory for the sake of wackadoodle theory. They are grasping to make it make sense. So, for instance, we're actually dealing with this situation right now, and I'm going to make an explosive statement. It's going to blow people's minds, but I'm going to say it. I'm going to say it out loud. For instance, we see this talk right now with the liturgy, right? And get ready. I hope people are sitting down watching this, because I'm going to blow you out. I'm going to blow you out of the water. People want to see the 1969 Missal abolished. They want it gone because they have all kinds of things against it. And of course, one of the major things that people say is, well, Bonini was a Freemason, so we had a Freemason running the ship here, et cetera, right? Well, I'm going to make a statement. The Bonini briefcase story is true. The priest who found the briefcase is still alive, and I have a connection to that priest. But here's the big deal. Here's the big deal. That doesn't mean much in the long run, that Bonini may or may not have been a Freemason. But people want to use that as a pretext to attack the Roman Missal of 1969. It is true. The question, did we get the Mass the reforms that went into the 69 Missal, that were the 69 Missal basically, is that what the Council Fathers wanted? That's a fair question to ask. If the answer is yes, then we go down one trajectory. If the answer is no, then we go down another one. Well, if the answer is no, why? The next question would be, why didn't we get that reform? Why, and that's where the question of Bonini possibly being an agitator would come into play. But there's a proper place for that, and that's the point. It's not the death knell that people want it to be. It's not the forcing of the great liturgical reset, as I like to call it. It's not going to force that. The most you'd get, and it ain't going to happen, but the most you get is a papal commission to look into something. But it's not that way. But this is the point. They want a quick, clean, Occam's razor kind of a thing. The simplest answer is usually the best one, the most correct one. And it just wipes away. Bonini was a Freemason, and it just wipes away everything. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. Because now you get theological problems. What about the indefectibility of the church? Can the church promulgate a liturgy that is not salvific? Is the Novus Ordo salvific? All those kinds of questions come into play here. What about, and Mike, you've done more work on this than I could probably hope to do in two lifetimes. But then there are questions about the nature of the magisterium here, right? Mm-hmm. So there has to be a kind of a scaffolding on this question. And hopefully I didn't blow everybody's minds with this revelation that the priest who found the briefcase is still alive. But, and I will add to that, he won't talk because he fears somebody's going to kill him. He will not talk because he fears for his life. Sensational as that may be, it doesn't address the larger theological questions that I've brought up here. But people who are not able to handle the theological conversations, and I don't mean that rudely, I'm just saying, if you don't, I don't have an aptitude for math. I sweated for my D's in math. It's not an insult to say that I'm ignorant of math. I know the basics. I can do my taxes every year. But I'm never going to be a nuclear physicist. I'll never be a medical doctor. I am ignorant of those fields. But there are a lot of those who don't know theology and they get scared. It's like when I was out at Franciscan University, I learned the difference between catechesis and theology, right? And I gave my friend Diana, she was working for the admissions department at Franciscan at the time. And we had to come and see her. And we were at the J.C. Williams Center, and we ran into each other. I was going one way, they were going the other. And she stopped me. She was, "Oh, Kevin, this is Billy. He's a come and see her." And so we're talking, and I go, "Yeah, how are you? Where are you from?" And all pleasantries. And then I said, "Oh, so what do you want to study?" He goes, "Theology." And I said, "Why?" And he said to me, "Because I want to learn more about the faith." I looked at him, totally deadpanned it, and said, "Then don't come here, or don't study theology." I thought Diana was going to have a heart attack on the spot. Okay. She had this look like waiting for the punchline, but there was no punchline. And I told the guy straight up. I said to him, theology is speculative. You are young. You're having a fresh conversion or reversion experience off of a youth conference. What you need at this time is catechesis, not theology. You will lose the faith if you come and study theology. And the simplest way I can explain it is, how can I sit there and explain to you the hypostatic union in Christ, the two natures in one person of Christ, if you don't even know that Jesus existed, so to speak? Mm-hmm. You need that first before you can start looking into, well, how is he both God and man at the same time? How does that work? That's the question of theology. That there is a hypostatic union, that's catechesis. a basic explanation of what it is, divine and human, one person, two natures, one person, right? And you need to be cemented in that before you can let your brain go, as it were, and or let your piety go in the intellectual academic sense and look at that and question it to develop our understanding of that.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, Diana was going to have a heart attack on the spot. But the point is still there. And so I would carry it back now to this larger point, which is a lot of people now are having their faith disturbed by social media. I would point that out, or other things, or books, or television shows, whatever. Insert medium or platform here, right? They're hearing all of these things, and they don't know where to turn, and it's disturbing them. And this is why I enjoy very much coming here to R&T, because it's very much an antidote. You can quote me on this. Reason and theology is an antidote against the errors of our times, end quote. You can quote me. Kevin J. Symonds.
What an endorsement.
There you go. Back in the early days, you also had Catholic Answers as well. Shout out to CA. No, Mike did not tell me to put a plug in for any of these organizations.
I didn't. Although I'm happy you did, but I did not.
Yeah, but this is what I'm saying. So there are these little groups, not little groups. That sounds condescending. I don't mean it that way. There are these organizations, these groups that have come together over time. Catholic Answers, being one of them, was a big one in the 90s. I think they were founded. Correct me if I'm wrong. Prior to that, you had CUF as well, Catholics United for the Faith, and I happen to have one book here written by a member of CUF, Lorene Collins, Salvation Redefined. Fascinating book as to see how things went askance and awry up in Canada. Fascinating book. So people we live in very confusing times. And we need to have those voices of reason. I personally believe R&T is one of them because of the balanced approach. I very much enjoyed and appreciated Catholic Answers approach over the years. There are other individual apologists that have stood up. I know a lot of people, for instance, have looked up to Scott and Kimberly Hahn. My alma mater, Franciscan University of Steubenville, Christendom College, Thomas Aquinas, the von Hildebrands. Alice recently passed away about 6 months ago. So, I mean, they're looking for answers and they need guidance. And in the Catholic Church, that guidance is the magisterium. But when you have people casting the doubt, casting the aspersions on the magisterium, what damage is going to be done?
But okay, so if this person who found the briefcase fears for his life, let's assume those fears are founded and not unfounded. If they're founded fears, does that mean that the magisterium has been infiltrated? And how can we now trust the magisterium? Because there's people operative behind the scenes in the Catholic Church who are trying to kill other people who want to speak the truth. Could you maybe speak to that?
Do you believe in the providential protection of God and the promise of Christ that the gates of hell shall not prevail against the church? Are you putting not your trust in faith, put not your trust in princes? I believe the scripture says, at least in one of the English translations. Are we putting our faith in these men, or are we putting our faith in God and what He has promised us? I mean, I struggle at times. I'm not immune. I feel for all as much as I question people and say these things, I'm not immune to the questions. I've had to do a lot of deep soul searching in my own interior life. I could write a book about this, but I've had to come to terms with what our blessed Lord said in the Gospel of St. Matthew, that scandals will come, but woe to those by whom the scandals come. We're not promised a church that's going to go through time without any scandal. We're not promised that. What we're promised is that there is a providential protection, and that will not be violated, because that would mean God is a liar. It won't happen that way. But we have to understand how it works. And I would, refer people to folks such as yourself, Mike, who have done work on these to show people how this all works and to educate yourself and to go deeper in the faith, and go and learn this, But if you're not theologically inclined, at least work on a catechetical level, educate yourself in the basics. Well, what does this mean? And kind of just go a little bit deeper into catechesis without necessarily slipping into theology. My alma mater has, a very good program based upon it. I myself was educated by Sister Johanna Perush, who was one of the biggest people in catechesis in our country. Now, I'm not saying that I'm good at it. As a matter of fact, Sister Johanna told me that I was pretty bad at catechesis. And I remember her words. Yeah, you can't do. Her exact words that I'm quoting. 21 years later, Kevin, I don't mean to be rude here, or anything, but you can't do it. You have no talent. You can't do it. End quote. Those are her exact words. That's exactly how she said it to me in her office back in the spring semester of 2001. I remember that to this day.
Nice.
I won't lie to anybody. That was a dagger,
Yeah.
And then it got twisted in subsequent years,
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm not a catechist, but I know how to pick up a book and read, and I'm a homeowner. I have I work 2 jobs. I'm a published author. I think I've demonstrated some reasonable competency.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I to be honest,
if I may have one little personal moment, take that, Sister Johanna.
Right. Well, people also
I throw that as a friendly jest.
Right,
I throw that as a friendly jest.
Well, people can also grow in 20 years. So
this is very true. This is very, very true. And and she's still very much revered out at Franciscan. I just saw one of her former students, a friend of mine who's now a priest in Massachusetts. That was just at the Don Bosco conference there, and I saw the picture of them together on Facebook, and people were like, "Oh, do you know her?" And he's like, "She taught me 20 years ago." They actually had T-shirts, the Sister Johanna fan club. Oh yeah. So anyway, I'm getting way off the rails here. So the point is, at least go to some depth in catechesis and learning the basics. Read the scriptures, read the catechism. I read the fathers of the church and the doctors of the church. Not everybody has the aptitude for theology, but if you come across something that, for whatever reason, you come across it, don't be afraid to reach out and ask people that you trust or have demonstrated a certain balance, like emailing Catholic Answers, or maybe here at R&T, or I have my website too, or other people as well.
I answer some of the emails that come in to Catholic Answers, so I look forward to seeing those.
So you can see, so you know what I'm talking about. You see the kind of questions that people will send.
I enjoy the questions. Yeah.
I know one person, I got an email from somebody recently. They said, what do you think of the Father Fuentes stuff in Sister Lucia? And I just wrote the gentleman back and I said, "Hi, very polite. Hi, thank you for your message." I said, "Have you read chapter 5 of my book?" Because the chapter 5 is all about that. And I walked people through the Spanish and the English and the Portuguese. I mean, I trudged right on through it all. And wouldn't you know, he never wrote back. Mm-hmm. So hopefully that means he got busy reading the book and is checking out the footnotes. And now has educated himself properly. And now he has the answer to his question.
Or he can't afford the book and he just was like, "Oh, well."
Or hey, I don't know. Maybe he went online and saw the videos of me doing that little short that I made on the Fuentes thing,
Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think I even went like this. I was like, because at that time that matter had come up on the internet and people were talking about it. I think it was Tim Flanders, and he was talking to Kennedy Hall, I want to say, or somebody. I think it was Kennedy Hall, and he said, Kevin's. And I was just like, "Tim, if ever there was a moment to cite chapter 5 of my book, it was then, because that discussion is yet to be changed, but they have the material for it through chapter 5 of the book. So again, the point is, read, educate, learn, go faith formation, basically is what I'm trying to promote here. Faith formation. Go and find those solid people that will help you. By the grace of God, there are excellent resources here on the internet, that some of which we've already talked about, and I myself I'm available too. If people consider me to be a balanced individual, they're more than welcome to contact me as well. I'm a bit limited on what I can and can't help with, but don't live in fear. Just pick up and read. Not every priest is going to have the answer. Sometimes we have to look it up ourselves. And in this day and age where we have the information super highway right at our fingertips, there really is no excuse why we can't look something up. So I'll end on that kind of a note.
By the way, Ramses says, Kevin is my favorite guest on RNT. Please let him know. Thank you, by the way, for the super chat there, Ramses.
Aw.
Yeah. So we'll have to have you on more, and we'll certainly do more. I always enjoy and learn from every time that you're on. I've greatly benefited from your content, so I look forward to more. Tell us where we can go to, learn more about your own content.
My website, kevinsymons.com. I haven't put up much up on it lately because I'm kind of behind on that. And today I have to write a letter to someone who just entered the Air Force. But yeah, just my website, kevinsymons.com. They can also get my books. I looked at we saw the Fatima one earlier. That's available through enrouteBooksandMedia.com. And then there's my book on the prayer to St. Michael, which is published by Preserving Christian Publications in Boonville, New York. This was the book that was at the heart of the controversy between me and Taylor Marshall. If controversy sells, fine. I'll throw a controversy out just to kind of get people interested to pick up the book and read it. Not to sell, but just to get people interested in educating themselves, right? Did Leo really have a vision? What was that vision? Did Jesus really have a conversation with the devil where in 100 years was granted to the church?
I remember that one. Yeah, I remember that one.
Book. This book is literally the only one of its kind. I am literally the only one in the world who's written this kind of a book on that subject.
I could have used it back in the day. I remember coming across that stuff about Leo, and so didn't know what to make of it with some of the claims that were being made. So,
yeah, as a matter, just real quick, I threw a grenade at somebody the other day. Back in 2016, somebody told me that they liked the book, and if they weren't going to advertise it on their website, but if they ever wrote about Leo's vision again, they would cite the book, right, or footnote it, or otherwise link it. Well, a few weeks ago, the same person published an article all about the salacious information about basically what after this book we can now call it disinformation. And so here's what I did. I sent the guy an email. The first was his quote from 2016 because it was a written quote on email. And then I sent him a link to his article, then his quote about linking me because he didn't link to my book at all and he was promoting all the stuff. And then I put a link to that scene. It was on YouTube, took that scene in the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie where Will Turner and Keira Knightley's character are talking and he messes up and she walks away in a huff and Johnny Depp comes from behind and goes, "If you were waiting for the right moment, that was it." And that's all I sent to the guy. He never wrote back, but that was one of those stinging, biting things. But I was like, well, dude, I mean, you're peddling disinformation, and you know better. That's the worst part. You know better, and you happen to know the guy who wrote the book for like a quarter of a century now, So it was. I just found it very offensive. So I wanted to throw some humor back,
I'd actually maybe like to have another conversation with you on a future episode about the content of the book. So maybe we'll do that.
Okay. Yeah, sure. I'm open to that.
It'll be fun. Everybody hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. Also check me out at patreon.com/reason and theology. You'll get access to extra content, and you're also supporting me, enabling me to continue to provide content like this. So I would certainly appreciate it if you would check me out there. That's going to do it, y'all. We'll see y'all later. Everybody have a great day. God bless. Oh wait, before you go, I would really appreciate it if you would consider supporting this channel. This is my primary means to provide for my family, and it also helps me to produce content like this video. If you would like to support me, become a patron by visiting patreon.com/reason and theology. You'll also get access to extra exclusive content when you become a patron. Lastly, hit that like button and the subscribe button, and be sure to leave a comment down below. God bless.